Hello, and welcome to another part in the series of Introduction to Java. I'm Michael from Software Subteam 1559. If I've forgotten to do that to every episode, probably wouldn't surprise me. Last episode we covered for loops, do-while loops, which are the most useless, and just plain old while loops. In this episode we're covering methods. But first off, we're going to go over last video's assignment, which was this beautiful masterpiece. Question 1 you could do with a for loop or a while loop. As we mentioned in the previous episode, the for loop's probably the better idea because the while loop it's basically the same thing but with a counter outside. And yes, you could do a do while loop, but like I said, they're not that important. Let me clear that. That was from a previous take in this recording, where I forgot to record. That was great. Question 2, dabbling in some modulus. I think I went over that in that previous video also. And question 3 was print stars. That was fun. That's basically what it did. Printed stars for 4 rows. So, yeah. If you have any more questions about that, you can just leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer your questions. And let's get into methods. Okay. So up until this point, we've been working with just the main method. It's pretty boring. Can't do that much with it, so, you know. That's why I was saying to you earlier that in robotics, you don't really use the main method all that much, and that's because you can make other methods. So let's actually take that assignment 3. We have this right here. And we're just going to copy it. Oh, copy it well, I guess. Control C. Okay. And we're going to make a new method. For this at this point, if I could talk, all you need is public static to start, and then next is that void you see. But that's actually where we stop for now and talk about, if I could type, return types. Okay, so a void return type means that the method returns nothing. It doesn't return anything. And what I mean by return is like a variable such as like an int, a double, a string, that kind of stuff. A void method won't return any of those. Yeah, and to return things, you type in return, and then whatever you want to return, and then semicolon. Okay, it kind of works like in the same. Never mind, actually. I wasn't going to say anything. Don't worry about it. So you have void, int, double, string, basically anything that we've worked with up to this point, and some other things too. You can return, and I mean that's pretty much the basics of it. So, but we're going to make this a void method because we want it to print, not return. So we do public static void, and we're going to name it. This is where you should be familiarized with how I was talking about. You have to make variable names have decent names. You want this to be the same way. You want your methods to have easily discernible names. So, for example, print stars. You know, it prints stars. Okay. And then you'll probably notice, okay, you have close parentheses there. What about this main method? What is this thing here? That's called a parameter. And basically what a parameter does is that it means, geez, I need to take a breath. I'm like rushing through these, like I have all the time in the world. It doesn't matter. So this is a parameter. Basically what it does is that it runs into this method. Like this method takes it in and uses it. So for example, in print stars, well, let's say we have int rows. It is an integer value that represents how many rows a user wants to print, or how many rows they want to be printed with stars. So we can copy that code we just had earlier, and I'm telling you, it is okay to copy code. If you typed it, if you didn't type it, if you have permission from the person who made it. If not, don't copy code. Not good. But I mean, if you typed it, it's totally fine. It's pretty much what everyone does. If you already have it typed, what's the point of retyping it if you already have it? Okay, and then what you can do here is where you see 4, you can just type in rows. And now what this method can do that this version couldn't do is it can change. As in, we can print as many rows of stars that we want, whereas the one in assignment 3 we can only print 4. Well, I'm not exactly sure if that's. I think the. Oh, what was it? I think the assignment itself actually didn't really matter how many numbers you put in there, but basically now we can make it any number we want, unless it's negative, because then it won't, or 0, then it won't print anything, obviously. But other than that, it'll let us print whatever we want. So I could type in, if you ever want to call a method, you type in its name. So the name of this method is print stars. Okay, cool. And then since that row, you see that row's right here, what are we going to do with that? In this parentheses that you when you're calling a method right here, you type in, well, what is this? Int rows? Okay, you type in an integer value. So let's say we want 10. We want 10 rows of stars, and if we press that, it will print them out. How nice. And we can change that, and we can also call this multiple times, which is honestly the most useful thing about methods. You can repeat code as many times as you want without having to necessarily copy this and then keep pasting it until you got the number you want. You can just call a method multiple times, which is a lot more convenient. Not to mention, you could combine this with loops if you wanted to, and you could have it run a certain number of times, which is nice. So for example, we could put that in a for loop and just say have it run as many times as we want. Pretty sweet. Or we could just not do that. That's probably the better idea, so we don't end up printing so much crap to this console. But yeah, we could do that. And then I like to think about methods, or at least my comp sci teacher told us that you should think about methods like baking a cake. You have there's different steps you take to make a cake, and some of them you can repeat. For example, crack an egg and put it in a bowl. Well, there's multiple eggs you gotta crack to put into a cake, so you gotta do that multiple times. And it's more convenient to just have a method that you call that does that for you, rather than typing it 3 times or how many ever times you need an egg to make a cake. You could just call the method 3 times rather than repeating those steps. I'll show you. For example, let's say let's just get rid of this. Okay. Let's say we had a method that does that. We're going to make it a void method like we did before, and it's going to be crack eggs. Okay, doesn't return it, or it doesn't take in any parameters. It just prints out, say, egg cracked. Egg in bowl. If I could spell bowl, that'd be nice. You can see, instead of, so if let's say you had 3 eggs to make a cake, you'd have to do that, which is, you could save a lot of lines of code by just calling the method instead. So we could just call crack eggs 3 times. We could do that, or even better yet, we know that we have the knowledge of for loops. We could simply just type for int I equals 1, I is less than or equal to 3, I plus plus. And now it will run through 3 times. That's seriously the power of methods. You can just run through them multiple times. It's really convenient. And I'll actually even give you an example. So for example, if I go to this class that I created for Tic-Tac-Toe project, go on that, you'll see immediately that some of this stuff you would not know how to do, and that's fine. But basically what I want to show you is that, yeah, methods are really useful. This project would not have been possible if methods didn't exist. Like, seriously, they're really useful. Especially for robotics too, because, well, it's really hard to make your robot work with just a block of code. And trust me, that's what makes methods nice, is that it breaks up code. So for example, if I had, let's say I was making a text-based game and I didn't use methods, it would look something like this. Yeah. Well, I mean, it would actually be a lot longer than that because this is copying. That didn't go right. But you get the idea. That does not look good. Whereas you could just call this multiple times instead, or you could just make it in a for loop. So that's why I'm going to do that. That's why it's convenient to just have loops to loop through methods. And it's important to have methods because then you can just repeat the same amount of code multiple times. Okay, I was trying to think what else I can cover. So parameters, should also mention, you can't have the same parameter names. Obviously, I think that'd be kind of obvious, but you can't have two parameters named the same thing, even if I believe if they are the different data types. Oh, no. Yeah, no, you still can't have the same name. And methods work the same way as variable names. You can't start with a 1. You can start with a $sign. That's the one. Start with a $sign. You can't. Oh, I probably should have mentioned this at some other point. If you want to mass declare variables, for example, let's say I have a bunch of ints. Let's say I have age, height, weight, and that's all I have. You can mass declare them, which is really convenient if you're declaring a bunch of variables. But that brings me to what you can't do with methods, which is you can't do this. I don't know why int, it's an int name, but you get the idea. You can't do that. You have to declare separate ints for everyone. It's a little tedious, but it's not that big of a deal, honestly. Okay, I'm trying to think of what else. If you can't tell, I don't script these videos because, well, then I'd sound like a robot. And although that would be very funny because we're talking about robots, and if I were reading like a robot, that'd be kind of, you know, a joke in itself. It's not fun, and also it would take a lot longer for me to make these videos if I had to script them. So yeah, if you couldn't tell already, all these videos have been unscripted. So yeah, that's great. Let's see here. I'm trying to think what else I can teach you about methods. Well, let me reiterate the things that are important. Robotics, you will probably never use the main method ever, and if you do, it's probably just to test in very rare situations. But for the most part, you won't be using it. Methods in robotics are very important. They pretty much all robotics code is just a bunch of method calls, and that's why it's important you make your methods have names that make sense. So yeah, try to do that. Just like your variable names, give them names that make sense, and don't type ones in front because it doesn't work. That kind of stuff. Don't create methods. This is probably the biggest thing. Knowing when to make methods. So you make a method when you repeat code multiple times. So for example, if I, like where I had with that cracking eggs example, right, I could just make that code a lot simpler by just making it a method. If you don't call, let's say you don't repeat, like you have a piece of code but you only use it once, there's no point in having a method for it because, well, there's just no point. It doesn't save any room for you. It just makes code more tedious. Like you should know when to split up code. If something's too long, then just try to split it up with methods. But if there's a piece of code you never repeat, you only use once, then you should not make a method for it, unless it's in some cases maybe you should if it's a really vital piece of information. That even if you use it once, it's just better to keep it in a method so that you know where it is in case you ever do use it another time. That's a good idea, but for the most part, if you only use it once, then you probably shouldn't make a method for it. Kind of just goes without saying. If you repeat it multiple times, then of course make a method for it. Let's see here. Okay, 15 minutes on. Trying to think what else we could talk about. Because I'm trying to make these videos at least 20 minutes. Even though, you get the idea. Let's see here. What else can we talk about methods? I wish you guys could just talk to me and just tell me what you need. Well, that's the worst case scenario. I'll just make more videos, that's fine to answer your questions. Because it's hard for me to think off the top of my head because I've been programming for 2 years now. I pretty much got everything. I'm pretty sure I know pretty much everything, but for basic things like these, it's harder for me to try to explain it. But I'm trying to think of other things. You can call methods within other methods. That's helpful to know. So, for example, if you had bake a cake method, you could have a method that's called bake a cake that calls the other methods like crack the eggs, put them in a bowl, whisk them, that kind of stuff. You can have a method that in that method body calls other methods. You can totally do that. That's fine. Something we'll get into probably never, honestly, unless you guys request it, is what we call recursion. Recursion is when a method calls itself. But for robotics' sake, you'll probably never be using that because recursion is really hard to work with. So, but just know that recursion is when a method calls itself. But like I just said, it's really unpredictable, especially for robotics, and the last thing you want is your robot malfunctioning because the code doesn't work, So don't worry about recursion. In fact, try to not remember it until a lot later, unless you want me to talk about it more. But other than that, don't use it. It's bad. It's really complicated to understand, and also it could break your code, and you don't want that. Okay, what else could we talk about? Not sure. Okay, we go over the return types again. Void returns nothing, int, double, those kind of stuff. Right? If it has a variable name, then it returns that variable type. If it has void, it returns nothing. If it has void, you can just type return semicolon in that method, and it acts as if you're not returning anything. That's fine. Which is probably what I should have done, because I don't think we did that. Or maybe we did. And I just forgot. Probably. I think we only used void types, though. So let's give you an example of private static int. Actually, let's do it double. Let's say we want the area of a square. I really hope I didn't. I think I did that in the previous take. I hope I didn't do it in this take. Which would be really sad if I already did, but I hope I didn't. I don't think I did. Okay. Area square. Pretty standard name, right? It's going to get you the area of square, and we want the parameter called double S. That's a pretty bad name, right? Yeah. So we'll call it side length. That's a lot better of a name. Okay. Wrong brackets. Alrighty. And you also notice that formatting, we don't want that. We want the same formatting throughout. Okay, area square. It's giving us an error because it needs the return type. So we will return, do math.pow, and then we can type side length 2. Okay, that'll give us the answer we want. Or we could just do side length times side length. And that will give us what we want, the area, which is pretty nice. And as you see, it returns the type double. So you need to make sure whenever it has double, int, boolean, anything that's not void, it needs to return something. Whether that be other objects, which we haven't got into yet, or a bunch of other stuff. You can return scanners too, because they are objects. A bunch of other stuff. Arrays you can return. You can return a lot of things. For now, you only have to worry about void and then the other variable types and string. Because string is a variable. Okay. Wow, I'm recording really late. Well, I think that's about it for methods. If there's anything I didn't cover, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll try to clear up anything for you. You can always ask me questions. That's totally fine. If you're on my robotics team, like I've mentioned before, it's probably better to just ask me in person, or Slack if you want to do that too. If you're just watching this during way preseason. Other than that, I think that's about it. Be sure to check out links in the description below. Those are really helpful. I think they're Java tutorials and Stack Overflow. Really useful tools to help you out. And you can check out our robotics team's website. That's in the description below. And so will the assignment. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.